chapter 1, verse 1, verse 2, Moses, my servant, is dead. The context of this story is that 40 years before chapter 1 of Joshua, God had delivered the children of Israel with a mighty deliverance where they crossed the Red Sea and the waters parted. Remember that story? Such an incredible thing where Moses took his rod at the command of the Lord and held it out over the waters, and the sea parted, and all of the children of God who had been in bondage in Egypt for 400 years were now released prophetically and with great power to be set free from the bondage of Egypt and cross the Red Sea and be on their way to the land that God had promised to give them. And you would think that a church that walked through a Red Sea on dry ground would believe God could do anything. But as soon as they got across the land and came near Canaan land, Moses appointed 12 men out of the church to go over into what was called the Promised Land, Canaan land, and spy out the land because they knew it was occupied, and those occupants would need to be driven out. And so Moses was a good leader, and he was getting a measure of what are we up against, and how do we need to organize, and what are we going to do to go in. And I think you know the story that those 12 men went, and they were astounded at what they saw. The inhabitants of that land, they were a different tribe of people. They were giants. They were huge. They were tall. The men said, I felt like a grasshopper when I saw those guys over there. But it was a land that flowed, the Bible said, with milk and honey. Why would God give us a place that's got nothing going on in it? Nevertheless, those 12 men returned, and 10 of the 12 men said, it is an incredible land, it's beautiful, it's prosperous, but we can't take it. We're not able. I love what they said, we are not able. They were right and they were wrong. It ain't about us, it's always about Him working in us and through us. It's not up to us, but it's through us. Greater is He that lives in us. But 10 of the 12 men somehow forgot that God had just walked them through a Red Sea and gave them a divine deliverance. And I mean, there's a lot of good teaching and preaching that goes on that story. You remember the Red Sea was before them, and Pharaoh's army was catching up to them, and they thought they were all going to die and get killed because there was no way of escape. How many knows God is a way-making God? And He will do whatever it takes to get His will done and get your purpose accomplished. And of course, God opened the sea, and they crossed. And now they are at the edge of entering into... Boy, I just got so much chills on me right now from the anointing. It's not from the air conditioning, it's from the anointing. I cannot imagine. I put myself in these stories. I put myself there. And it's like looking at the interstate over there. That's the land that flows with milk and honey that God has promised us for a long, long time. There's houses already built for you to live in. There's businesses or vineyards already planted. You don't have to plant them. They're already bearing. And there's wells that are dug there for you to drink out of. Everything is ready. I've prepared it for you. And all you got to do is just go. And 10 men come back and say, we can't do it. And one of the things I want to ask Moses when I get to heaven is, why in the heck did you listen to those negative people? I mean, I'm serious. Moses was the friend of God. Moses was really close to God. Moses knew what he was doing. He was being used by God mightily, and yet he let the voice of 10 men who were not the friend of God, who had not had the exposure to the presence of God, men who had not been on the mountain of God and written His law into the text. I mean, he let 10 just guys convince him they were not able. And there were two men, Joshua and Caleb, who said, we are well able to take the land. And Moses succumbed to the negative view of God's will. He capitulated on the steps of obtaining the promise of God. And it really made God angry. And as a result, I think God was ready to wipe them out. But there was a deal made, and God said, I won't kill them, but he said, I'm going to sentence them to wandering in this wilderness out here for 40 years. And so now they have been wandering for 40 years. That's the backstory to where we started reading in Joshua chapter 1. Not only did God let the unbelievers who did not think God was able to empower them to take the thing that God had promised them, he let the leader die with them. Now Moses is dead. And guess who replaces the man who's succumbed to the negative voice? Was one of the two men who said we're able, and his name was Joshua. And so now God has called Joshua to rise up and be the leader of the new season and the new level and the new assignment that God now has for his people. The statement, Moses, my servant, is dead, is a very important statement that you need to have in your life, because assignments and seasons will come to an end. And if you try to prolong them or resist them, you will lose. Because anytime a new season ends, a new season will begin. The pattern in the order of spiritual things is something must first die before something lives. Except a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it abides alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit. So the order in spiritual things is something first has to die before the next thing can come alive. God does not let, hear me now, two competing visions exist simultaneously. God will not let two competing seasons exist simultaneously. Say, Randy, I don't understand what you're saying. Let me break it down for you. God does not let summer and winter exist at the same time. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that spring and fall don't work at the same time? Why? Because God is the God of order. Something ends and something begins.